Good morning. My name is Claire Morethi, Marketing Manager.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Wayo Ambuli, Lead New Ventures.
All right. Thank you, everyone. And now it's my pleasure to invite Mr. Stephen Kitagama to make his remarks, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mutuma. So, good morning again. Now, I think my responsibility is to invite the chairman. But before I invite the chairman, I'll just mention one or two things. Mr. Mutuma talked about the digital transformation journey, which we started around 2018. Then in September, on September 4th, we had the launch, official launch of the digital transformation journey, where we launched Nation.Africa. The launch and the campaign associated with this is a culmination of a lot of work which has involved a number of you and a number of other partners across the world. We have continued to receive global attention, and we may all know that in the global international forum design, if NMG's Nation.Africa campaign has been nominated, is a finalist in this, and we hope that we'll do well. And I'm sure the nomination itself is a testimony of the good work that we are doing. Now, the digital transformation map, maybe I can mention that and then go to the next item. At the center of this transformation map is content. Content, and the core deliverable, the core player is the consumer or the customer. In the past, we used to say content is king, but I think now the consumer is king. So we do all this bearing in mind that we are trying to target the consumer. The consumer, who is the audience, is the primary person that we want to attract, we want to engage, and we want to satisfy. Now, this consumer consumes the content that we produce, and technology is what we use to develop the content and also to disseminate the content to the consumer. So there are those three key pillars. At the center is the customer, then content and technology. Then the input to all this is people. Our people are the ones who provide the content that will meet the needs of the consumer. Then at the end of it is monetization, because we do this with the objective of making money for the organization or rewarding our efforts and ensuring that the business is sustainable. So we have to monetize the content. And I think that's one of the objectives of the paywall that we'll be launching soon. So if all these 5 aspects work seamlessly, the people, the consumer at the center will be happy, the technology and the content, we are assured that we'll make money and the organization will continue to be sustainable. Now, this means that we have to develop our talent. It calls for us to really move from our traditional way of doing things to a modern way of working that ensures that we meet the needs of the changing consumer. The other thing which is a key prerequisite is a digital footing that we build, and therefore the technology that we adopt becomes very important. I would also like to remind us of our promise. This is always very important. And I'll read just one paragraph of the promise and maybe mention 1 or 2 other things that are important. Our promise is that we are Nation, Africa's #1 independent media brand. We are committed to transforming Africa through empowering our audiences by informing, educating, and engaging them. So whatever we do, we should remember that promise, because that's what we work for. So it calls for us to create and deliver quality content around the continent, from the news as it unfolds to the research and the tools needed to explain Africa's transformational journey. And it is significant to the livelihood of its growing population. Then we say each of us at Nation is a champion of this mission, sharing a common mindset driven by a set of values that we live by. Now, we gradually are moving our business model from relying on advertising to a reader revenue model. And that's why the customer becomes very important. For us to achieve this, we'll need to ensure that we continue delivering quality content, and therefore, professionalism is very important. We must maintain very high quality standards, high standards of our profession for us to achieve this objective. All these are in line with the objectives that we set ourselves early, I think in 2016, 2017, where we said that there are two key pillars to the business. One is to grow the content business, and the other one is to create new value. So we continue doing that. On one hand, we grow content business and we create new value. And I'm sure if we continue with what we are doing, we will succeed and will do well. So without adding more, I would like to invite our chairman to give his remarks, and then we can go to the launch of the paywall. So, Kiboro, welcome. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning. Kwani baridi imekuwa nyingi zaidi. I want to start by thanking Stephen and Mutuma for inviting me to this meeting. The objective of this meeting, I think we have two main agendas. The first one, I think has been explained by Mutuma, is to do our agenda setting session. And the second one is, of course, the launch of the paywall, Nation paywall. So I'll start by maybe making a few remarks about the agenda setting session, part of it. And to say that the objective of this meeting is to deliberate and set the agenda that will inform and guide our editorial direction in the company in the coming few months. I think you're all aware that our country is going through some fairly challenging times. The effects of COVID-19 pandemic are still being felt across the world, and even here in Kenya. Businesses are just beginning to recover from the shutdowns and the restriction that we witnessed last year from, in an effort to contain the virus. And also, more importantly, I think we can all agree that our country has been plunged to an election mode, despite the elections being 16 months away. We have seen political tensions rising, threatening to tear the country apart. Already, I think as has been reported, we have witnessed violence in political rallies with shocking and intemperate language being used by politicians, and hate speech now being the order of the day. Politicians have hijacked the BBI initiative, with opposing sides just focusing on the elements that suit their political interest, leaving Wajiko really confused and not really making heads or tails about it. There is need to explain all this, what is going on around us, because that is what the role of the media is. The economy is in the ICU, I guess. as evidenced by what we have seen in job losses in many organizations. We are contending with a crippling national debt. People are complaining of being overtaxed. The KRA are collecting taxes, overborrowing by the country, a weakening currency, and major corporates even declaring a profit warning, and tens of thousands of people losing their jobs and sliding below the poverty line. And these are important national issues in terms of how we move forward, because the media is a critical element in terms of the discourse that goes on around in terms of shaping the country going forward. Corruption is at an all-time high. In yesterday's Sunday Nation, I think you had a section which talks about fact-checking or something like that. And it confirmed, I think, to the horror of a lot of us, what the president said a couple of weeks ago, that Kenya loses, or 2 billion Kenya shillings are stolen every day from the public coffers. And this is something that's really worrying. Because when you multiply that by 365 days in a year, we are saying that we lose over 700 billion shillings to the thieves every year. And yet, the culprits of this plunder continue to enjoy their ill-gotten wealth uninterrupted and with impunity. Who is going to call them out if we don't? On health issues, in addition to COVID-19 presenting a rare opportunity for the looters to continue with their plunder, the government appears unprepared for the tough task ahead of administering vaccines, which could save millions of lives. The question here is, will the vaccines procurement and distribution create other COVID-19 millionaires? Maybe they'll not be called that, they'll be called vaccine millionaires. Schools and institutions of higher learning are now open. While this is commendable, because clearly we cannot keep our children indefinitely at our homes, the question that we must ask and must follow is, are our children home as a result of going back to school? I don't know. But it's for us as media to unearth that and just, not only just to say the thing that is telling the truth, but even more importantly, even suggesting some of the ways in which we could move forward that agenda. More worrying on this COVID issue is that our Tanzanian neighbors have been told by their president not to bother going for COVID-19 vaccine jabs. How will this affect us? Because the virus doesn't respect territorial boundaries, and therefore how will this pan out if Tanzania is the only country, our neighbor, which doesn't get the vaccines when they get available? On security relations with Somalia, our relations in Somalia are at an all-time low and are worsening. And we have also seen a lot of insecurity in the northern provinces. Kapedo is one of them, and so on. And when you look at the genesis of some of these conflicts, a lot of them have their genesis in environmental degradation and climate change. So this is another area that we look at. Because what these guys are hustling around, stealing each other's cows, is because of the environmental degradation, and they don't have pasture for their animals. The media, ladies and gentlemen, is why I was mentioning all this, is that we have an obligation to explain and educate the public on matters that affect their lives. We also have a crucial role in shaping the debates on important national issues and shaping the agenda for our country. This is what this sitting is all about. I think some of the things that I've mentioned, I'm sure you have a lot more. Let us sit together today to deliberate on these issues so that in the coming maybe 1 year or several months, we can then determine what are the priorities that we really need to talk about. What are the things that are really affecting our countries, and what are the kind of things that we need to put out there that can help to put this country forward. This is what, therefore, I hope we shall achieve at the end of the day. To make it really very interactive, I suggest that we all leave our titles out there. So here, hakutakuwa na chairman, there is no CEO, there is no executive editor, there is no all these big titles, Wakina Wangethi and everybody else. We are all here as people who are to debate. We are equal. So I want to encourage people to speak up and speak plainly and candidly, because that is the only way we can have a candid and constructive discourse on the matters ahead of us. With those few remarks, I would just like now to briefly talk about the paywall, which we're going to launch. We will be launching the national paywall, and I think there is a video, I'm told by Mutuma that there is a video that will follow, that hopefully will explain what the paywall is all about and what we are intending to do. But I think the launch of the paywall is a culmination of our decision last year to transform into a modern digital business and model, and diversifying our business model. In this new business model, our audiences will be central, as Stephen has explained. They'll be central to our editorial and business decisions. This is a model that empowers our readers, as opposed to saying, and also where we encourage them actually to be part of the content, developers. The paywall has been configured, and maybe if you're asking what a paywall is, it's a wall that you go when you come to our website. That to access some certain content, we will require that it be paid for. But it has been configured in a friendly way to ensure everyone can still get and share the stories that are critical to their lives, including those that allow them to participate meaningfully in the civic space. The paywall will allow readers to access premium content that is of use to them, content that is truthful, content that they can rely on, and content that is well researched. This takes a lot of resources to put all this together. And this is why we are saying that not everybody, because when you read a paper or you're watching the TV, you may not be interested in everything that is in the content of the paper. We are giving our readers the choice to be able to access the quality, the content that they need, and where they can be guaranteed that that is premium content, it's well-researched content, it's truthful, and that it actually helps in whatever business you may be engaged in. It is a content that is of value to you. And this is what we are asking people, that because putting this content together, we'll be getting professionals, in-depth researchers and everything to put it together. And I think it is only right that people, when you get that content, there is never a free dinner. So basically, I think it is not unreasonable to ask that you pay for the content that you know you can use and use it well. We aim to continue giving voice to our citizens, as we have done since the inception of this group 61 years ago. We commit to maintaining the highest level of journalistic excellence. This is our promise, and this is what we'll continue to do. So when you go through our paywall, you can bet that in fact whatever we are putting in there is truthful and is well researched and is professionally put together. With these few remarks, it is my duty to declare, and my pleasure, to declare the Nation Paywall officially launched. Thank you so much.
I think that explosion marks the end of the introductory, the first part of the day. I hope everyone is okay. Now, so we can move into one final business of launching the editorial policy. And for that, I'm going to invite the chairman of EBC, Mr. Francis Okello, to make his remarks. And then he will invite, that's not the way it normally works, but after his remarks, Mr. Mwangi will make his own remarks, and then we shall perform a small handover where the chairman will formally hand over the documents to a few editors, and then we shall get into business proper. Mr. Chairman, please.
I think I can do without this. It's now on? Okay, thank you. This segment will be in two bits. I will deal with the philosophical underpinnings regarding the revised editorial policy guidelines, and a colleague and a member of the editorial board committee, Bwana Wangethi Mwangi, will be sharing with you in more details the actual shifts that we are introducing in the current iteration of the policy, editorial policy guidelines that we are formally launching this morning. The Nation Media Group's editorial policy and guidelines have defined the organization's journalism over the ages, giving its editorial products an admirably distinct character that guarantees them pride of place in the marketplace. Crafted in the group's formative years to address its print journalism, the guidelines remained largely intact in their original form until the early 90s, when Kenya's political transformation, allowing for greater civic and media space, necessitated crucial adjustments. The current update, which we are just about to formally launch, is a sequel to the 209 update, which in turn was preceded by the 2003 update. In the earlier years of our existence, it was considered politically expedient to profess support for the government of the day. So it is that the policy guidelines reflected unequivocally, and I quote, "The group will support the government of the day." That was then. However, as the political dispensation progressively changed, this was adjusted to reflect support for the growing clamor by citizens for better and more meaningful democratic governance and engagement. Hence, there was a marked shift to the current policy, which declares, quote and unquote, support for the principles of democracy as they are mostly widely understood. Other adjustments sought to address the exigencies of the group's transformation into a multimedia corporation, its broadening mandate as it expanded its territorial footprints into Tanzania and Uganda. And of course, those adjustments were also dictated by the imperatives of the changing media landscape. In the main, though, the dictates of the policy and guidelines remain as true today as they did when they were first introduced. As the group's foundational values, the policy and guidelines define our editorial standards, ideals, the professional ethics underpinning our journalism, our mission and role in society, the obligations of the group's editors and the staff, our commitment to and promotion of media freedom and editorial independence, and the general character and philosophy of our products. The resulting frameworks of core values have seen us seriously preoccupied with matters related to accuracy, fairness, discipline of verification and accuracy, consistency in style, and rigorous selection of content for its inherent value. These serve as useful guideline for our journalists in generating and shaping content. Apart from defining our core values, the policy and guidelines also define the raison d'etre for our existence as a media organization. The current revision seeks to build on this framework, essentially to align the policy and guidelines with the changes in the media landscape occasioned by new technology that is steadily shifting readers' and audiences' attention from the so-called legacy media to more versatile news and information platforms, particularly handheld devices that are driven by high-speed internet connectivity. However, the alignment takes cognizance of the fact that although the group is fast pivoting to digital, it is forced by circumstances to adopt organizational ambidextrity. I'll try again. However, the alignment takes cognizance of the fact that although the group is fast pivoting to digital, it is forced by circumstances to adopt organizational ambidexterity strategy, which involves both leveraging the present opportunities while exploring future opportunities, thereby inevitably resulting in the group continuing to straddle between legacy and digital media, at least in the interim. Social media in particular has spawned a new generation of information sharers, more commonly referred to as citizen journalists. Their impact in forcing legacy media to think differently and creatively about new ways of telling stories, distinct from the age-old format of he said and she said. The revisions attempt to address this challenge. Additionally, the revision restates the group's overarching social obligations as highlighted below, and its primary objective of establishing itself as a media of Africa for Africa that recognizes its role in the continent's progress and development. Our social obligations include the obligation to inform and protect the public interest without fear or favor, the obligation to contribute to the continuing development of the markets we operate in, as well as those of the rest of the African continent, the obligation to protect speech and media freedom as basic elements of any democratic society, the obligation to protect people against injustices or neglect committed by public authorities and institutions, private concerns, and others. Of course, the obligation to foster racial, ethnic, religious, and communal harmony, and political party tolerance, as well as other forms of pluralism. We have an obligation to support the principles of democracy, good governance, transparency, and accountability, the obligation to support the practice of regular, free, and fair elections, as well as social equity. We have an obligation to support and promote the protection and promotion of human rights and other forms of civil liberties. There is an obligation to support and promote public debate on matters of national, regional, and international importance. We, of course, have an obligation to support, promote, and contribute to the protection of conservation of the environment and sustainable development. And it's for this reason, among others, that we as a media organization are overly preoccupied with issues to do with climatic change, which, as we all know, is actually an existential threat to our survival as human species, but also as is a threat to our own human civilizations. Last but not least, we have an obligation to support the most economically vulnerable members of the society through the various corporate social responsibility initiatives and programs that we run as an organization. Finally, this iteration, which we will be referring to hereafter as the 2020 update, has been revised for clarity, signaling a distinct differentiation between policy issues and guidelines on the one hand, and purely operational and administrative procedures on the other. It positions the latter separately, merging them with the editorial department's standard operating procedures. Access to these and additional guidelines to address new imperatives of the journalism profession has been provided through hyperlinks in the document. Also, a number of the references in the document are drawn from Kenya. It is therefore suggested that our units in Tanzania and Uganda should substitute these references with their equivalent in those jurisdictions. As I said at the beginning, I was going to be dealing with the philosophical underpinnings of the revised editorial policy and guidelines. And at this point, I would now want to hand over to Bwana Wangethi Mwangi, who is a fellow director and a member of the EBC, to take us through the specific shifts that this current update will be focusing on. Thank you very much. Yes, Chief.
So good morning, everyone. So we move away from philosophical underpinnings and that mouthful of a word. Was it again? What was it again? Ambi something. Yeah, we move away from that and go to simpler things like nuts and bolts. Eh? So, Frida? I brought this thing that we all used to call the PowerPoint presentation. It makes work a lot easier, isn't it? So I can just keep quiet and we roll down the slides and you clap and then I go back to my chair. That's the bottom slide. So, okay, let's go to the second one. In view of what Mutuma questioned us about earlier, in terms of how pressed we are for time, I'll try and make this very, very quick and just highlight what I think are the big changes that we need to be looking at. Francis has already mentioned the issue of language. The original document contained a lot of phraseology and a lot of verbiage that I thought, took away the focus from the real meat of the guidelines. So I tried as much as possible to tighten the language, and perhaps in future revisions we might find more opportunities to trim the language even further. And Francis has also mentioned about the guideline, the separation between the real policy and guideline issues and operational issues. In the original document, you found a very descriptive menu in terms of how editors need to meet in the mornings, at what time and what they discuss, how the weekend publications ought to meet and what to discuss and what have you. That belongs in the realm of standard operating procedures, so that has been taken away altogether. We have had increasingly to deal with issues of sponsored content and native content, which until maybe 2 or 3 years ago, we didn't have much to say about them. Now we have a clear set of guidelines that define for us what native advertising is, what sponsors content is, and much more importantly, how we need to handle those two content elements. Then, of course, we've been talking about digital mindset, and the guidelines have a very strong element on how we restructure our thinking and our operations to embed our entire culture in the digital realm of doing things. And second one. Frida. So, when we are dealing with sponsored content and native advertising, the first thing that we understand, and that is explained very well in the policy, is that native advertising in particular can be very deceptive in terms of projecting itself as real editorial content. So when we are dealing with it, we advise ourselves that we need to ensure that we safeguard the integrity and sanctity of our editorial products. And we do that by signposting that what we have on this page is native content, and what, even though it looks as good as the articles that we apply all our journalistic techniques in generating, it's actually paid for content and not actual journalistic articles. And then, of course, we have all these new terms, infodemic and fake news and misinformation and what have you. How do we deal with them? And the suggestion here is that we, more than ever before now, need to immerse ourselves in a very strict discipline of verification. And going beyond that, we need to start looking at organizations that have perfected the art of fact-checking. And there are very many of them, and examples are given there of Africa Check. I think EJN stands for Ethical Journalism Network, Pointer Institute, ICJ, and there are very many of them. These are just examples. So we need to start looking beyond our own capabilities to see what else we can draw in terms of resources from groups that are also doing similar work to the one that we are doing. Frida? And then, of course, data journalism. And we are doing very well in that respect when you look at what the Newsplex desk at Nation Center churns out every so often. And that's the direction that we need to be going to. It's a new technique for telling stories. It embellishes stories, it strengthens stories, and it also helps readers focus almost immediately on the stuff that you are throwing at them. Then, of course, there is the whole important issue of style. And the policy re-emphasizes that in a very great detail. Journalism is not just the news. It's also the way you write the news. It's the language that you use. It's the consistency of spelling, whether it's names or words. One of the things that you learn very fast when you get into the Nation stable is that we use the Queen's English and not the American English. So that words that like harbor or neighbor that lose their U across the seas in the American continent quickly adopt the U when you come to our stable. So the Queen's English is the English of the journalism of the nation. And this is where we fail a lot. Every time you open the newspaper or even see the captions on our TV screens, that's where it begins to hit you, that we have lost that discipline of consistency. And consistency gives nations journalism a very distinct feel and a very distinct flavor. And that what distinguishes it from all the other journalism that you see being practiced elsewhere in our marketplace. The other thing that the policy introduces is this whole concept of media partnerships. And we have done that very well with Bill and Melinda Gates. But there are others that we can do. And we should seek those opportunities because there is no time that we will pretend that we have enough resources to give us the reach that we need to generate content from far-flung places. And that's where media partnerships come into play. So think beyond Bill and Melinda Gates, and as we are expanding the concept of Nation.Africa, that comes into play in a very practical way. At least this year, sometime this year, I think towards November, Kisumu will be hosting the Afri-Cities Summit, which is held, I think, every 4 years. I think the last one was somewhere else in North Africa. So this is a real opportunity for nations to partner, for instance, with Kisumu City to become Kisumu City's media partner, so that we can begin to explore the kind of themes between now and the time of the summit, the kind of themes that we might share with our audiences across Africa, because this is not a Kisumu thing, it's a Pan-African thing, Kisumu just playing host to the summit. Frida? Then the other thing, very important thing that the policy introduces is when to take down a story. We are used to apologizing or correcting mistakes on our platforms. But this time we are going beyond that and asking ourselves, if a story is terribly wrong, factual and in every way, and it is damaging, does it need to stay online? And why should it stay online? If the answer is no, then we provide a policy and guidelines on when and how to take down that story. So compelling legal reasons, for instance, if the story is fundamentally inaccurate, if it's obsolete and all that. So you clean up the stable so that anybody researching and comes across that story, that story will not be confused as to its whatever integrity. Frida, next. Live broadcasting. Then we have introduced a lot of guidelines on live broadcasting. We've always had a struggle in terms of when to show an event live. I was involved in a discussion the other day where it was being suggested that even political events that probably are launching manifestos or stuff like that ought to be treated as commercial events, and therefore if the inclination is to cover them live, then somebody should pay for that space and for that time slot. Editors, I'm sure, would disagree with this. So how do we determine when to go live with an event? and who makes that decision. So the guidelines provide a way out of that miasma. Next. This is another area that we struggle to agree on quite a lot. Mutuma used to write a lot of commentaries on the editorial, or a lot of op-eds on his political views regarding a matter. And we sat back and asked ourselves, is he speaking as Mutuma or as Nation? Do the people out there understand the difference between Mutuma and the Nation standpoint itself? And that was what led us to this point of trying to determine what kind of straight jacket do you ask Mutuma to wear, and will he be comfortable wearing that tight jacket? And does it serve a useful purpose? We thought that it does, actually. So you allow Mutuma to write. He can write about how he stopped smoking, or how his health has improved since he stopped eating meat and stuff like that. But if the Nation wants to share its political standpoint on an issue with its audiences, then it will express that opinion on the editorial, in its editorial columns as it happens. And I don't think we have had any issues since, because this has been in practice for a while, I don't think we have had any issues since that was discussed with Mutuma and other editors, and things seem to be working okay. That is not to say that Mutuma cannot go to his local pub and pontificate about his political standpoints from morning to evening. That's his business. But in the Nation columns, let him stick to why he stopped smoking. Next one. Did you say pontificate? Yep. Kizungu mingi. Yeah, Kiswahili mingi. The other issue that, and I'm sure a lot of you have debated this one, is TV debates. Do we overdo them? And do they serve a useful purpose? I guess the answer is yes and no. When you look at the selection of panels and the diversity or lack of diversity, what does this say to you in terms of what the Nation is trying to say to you? You have the same talking heads every day discussing the same things. You have the same men, bulls, just knocking their heads together. So is there a way we can take it beyond where it seems to be stuck, give it more diversity in terms of the panelists themselves and also subject matter? Has it always got to be politics? And I think we've made some progress in that area, except now I don't see much of talking heads at Nation. Is it a good thing? I think it's not a good thing to shut the door completely on talking heads. They serve a useful purpose. It's just a question of how they are managed that one needs to deal with when considering that. Then there's the whole question of, you are watching a news bulletin, 7 o'clock, 9 o'clock, whatever time, then suddenly a whole 15 minutes is dedicated to interviews, what you call in-bulletin interviews. Can we manage them better? So we have introduced a guideline that helps editors like Warungu to manage that better. Then, given our experience in Somalia with the issue of embedded journalism and the problems that our journalists went through, we've introduced a whole section on how this can be handled, and also emphasizing the bit about the Nation's duty of care to its journalists. Frida? Social media, there's a social media policy. That speaks to the same issue that I raised earlier about when the editor is posting, when the editor is commenting on an issue, is he commenting on behalf of the group or is he commenting as himself? So social media policy, the activities that we engage in on social media, are they likely to bring the group to disrepute because of their nature? Should we be careful about how we involve ourselves in social media? So the guidelines attempt to give editors some guidelines on how to handle themselves in that area. Frida? And then, of course, as Francis said, there is a whole section on of appendices on, that are not spelled out in detail in the policy, and for us to get a better understanding of them, then we go to the indices, and these are all hyperlinked. And I think that's about all. There's also election coverage and all that. Next, let's see whether there's anything else. I think that's all. That's all, gentlemen. Thank you. And ladies. Oh, the other thing I meant to say. Policy, like Francis said and I've tried to say, defines what we do as nation journalists. It projects ourselves as who we are, and it places us where we are at the very top of the chain in terms of importance in this industry. But the policy is useless if we don't read it, if we don't immerse ourselves in it. And that then becomes the mandate of the editors themselves to ensure that they evangelize the importance of the policy. How you create that strategy, whether you use dexterity or whatever it is, I don't know. But it is very important that you get everybody to understand and invest